A wandering mendicant came to a great teacher seeking liberation, and the teacher said to him, "Take your begging bowl and bring to me the lowest and the filthiest thing with which your bowl can be filled." Now this wandering mendicant had travelled all over the world, and in his travels had received both good and bad, sweet and sour. So in casting around to find what it was that the master was asking of him, he could not find in all of those elements of life that he had ingested what could be considered the lowest and filthiest of all. But as he was walking down the road, suddenly he had the urge to defecate. So he went by the side of the road under a tree and relieved himself. And then, as he looked at what had been eliminated, he thought to himself, "This must be the lowest and filthiest of all." And he was about to scoop it up into his begging bowl, when suddenly the excrement spoke to him, "Don't touch me. How dare you judge me? 2 hours ago, I was the sugar bun that you ate from the coffee shop just a while ago." So the wandering mendicant, seeker, went back to the master and handed him his begging bowl. Last week, a question was asked: if you were an alchemist, what element would you choose to be the medium to add all the other elements of life? And if you were an artist, what color would you choose as the basis to add all the other colors of life? But now, let's go deeper. There's that story of Lilopa. He was of noble birth, but he became a wandering monk, carrying his begging bowl around from place to place. But one day, in a town he came to, he passed by a tavern, an inn, a house of ill repute, you could say, a brothel. And he was compelled to enter. When he did so, he was confronted by what is known as a dakini, a goddess. This goddess confronted him and eyed him and said, "You still have a pea-sized knot of arrogance and judgment in you." And with that, she filled his begging bowl with sour, rancid slop. He left that tavern and immediately threw the contents of the bowl into the street outside. But the dakini goddess was watching and said, "How can you attain to liberation if you have one mode of judgment, discrimination in you?" So the one who was called Lilopa went off, and taking his begging bowl for some long while, he would accept only the fish guts from the fishermen at the wharf, until he was able to look in his bowl without any thought of repulsion, taking in what it was, this element, the fish guts left behind from the fish caught by the fishermen, until such time as in his wanderings he could accept whatever it was that was placed in his begging bowl without any repulsion, not a mote of judgment. In that moment, Lilopa threw away his begging bowl and became the great Siddha, spreading truth, the truth that he had attained to all. And then lastly, there's that story about the monastery, where, as is the tradition and has been for decades, that the monks, the seekers who came, would take their begging bowl out into the streets of life, receiving and taking in whatever it was that was given to them. But in this monastery, it was found that the acolytes did not like to go begging. They resisted with all their might. They were given their little bells to ring, to indicate that they were there holding out their bowls, but they kept their bells quiet. They hid in doorways, their pride perhaps disallowing them from coming forth, holding out their bowls to receive whatever was given to them. So the abbot called them all together and told them of the traditions, that this was what represented their abilities to accept whatever life brought along for them. But they were not able to accept this. And so the abbot said, "Well then, I have to give you the lesson about begging. From this moment on, there will be no food served in this monastery." After some days, the monks, the acolytes' stomachs growled with hunger. And so when they took their begging bowls out into the streets of life, they begged in earnest. They rang their bells. They chanted the sutras. They stood in front of passers-by, holding out their bowls. And then there was a time when the abbot realized that their lesson had been learned. And he also advised those acolytes, those monks, those seekers, now you know the true meaning of begging. Food will now be served. So the question that's asked of us now, the challenge that's put before us, when we look for the elements of life, that basic element to which we can add all the other chemistries, we could call it a fundamental belief, or even begging, bowl, empty, or like the artist, consider what color we would use to add all the other colors of life. This too could be considered a begging bowl. But if we go deeper, if we go beyond, the question can be asked of us, what is it that we now hold out to life? Do we still have a begging bowl? A belief, a vehicle, a vessel. What is it that we now bring to the moments of life? Hold out to life. Is it still a begging bowl? If so, what is it? What do you consider the vessel that you hold out to life? Or have you relinquished this last indication that we are something